and that tells me that I should be live. So I'm gonna wait, as is custom, for someone to say they can see me. I see a couple people in chat already, so I can't actually. Let's see. Anyone want to say something and confirm that my voice is? Oh, Deepa Park says, "Yep, yep." Hello, everybody, and welcome to DevStream number 4 for Expeditions Rome. We'll let the crowd kind of gather for a little bit as things are getting started. It's going to be a good show today. We're talking about some things a little bit different, and we have a new first-time guest today. So, welcome, August, to the stream. August, how you doing today?
Hi, thank you. I'm doing just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're the so we've talked so far so much about gameplay and story and all those aspects, but today we're diving into the whole different area. We're talking about art. You're the art director of the studio, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. And what's so tell everyone a little bit about yourself. Like what's your because art directors come from so many different backgrounds. Like game designers, obviously, it's kind of a or a programmer. There's kind of a narrow set of skills, but art director can be a modeler or a concept artist or even an animator. Like there's so many different disciplines inside of art. So where does your background come from?
I actually have a kind of an unusual background. I started out originally as a traditional graphic designer, and I worked in food packaging for a couple of years
Food
after.
packaging.
Yes. So I
I
did
actually don't think
food
I do that.
packaging designs for the largest supermarket chain in Scandinavia for a couple of
Really?
years. But
And
I
then
mean,
that's
I had always wanted to work in games, and I did modding and small projects on the side with friends and so on. So I always wanted to move in that direction. So in my, day-to-day life, I would work as a graphic designer, and then I would make games in my spare time, and slowly try to shift my skill set more towards 2D concept design and the like. And that's how I started. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. What was there? What were some of your? I mean, I don't know if I could ask what your inspirations were on the food packing industry, but what were some of your inspirations on the gaming side? Like, what were were there particular artists or games that really excited when you were kind of just getting started?
Yeah, I should probably have mentioned that I started out my life as a gamer. My dad bought me the first Dungeons and Dragons set when I was 9, back in
Oh
the 80s.
wow!
I'm kind of old, so I was always a gamer and became a hardcore computer gamer when my dad bought an Amiga 500, also back in the 80s. Um, and then I moved on to consoles, which I stayed on for a very long time. And actually, I didn't move back to PC gaming until I started working in game development. Um, so my original inspirations are really ancient. I'm a huge Baldur's Gate fan. I've played that more than any other game, I think, the original series. Um, I also had a huge period of time where I was very hardcore into fighting games. I played on like national level tournaments in Tekken in Denmark, and that was like my life
What?
for a number of years.
You were a Tekken competitive gamer?
Yes,
You're
but
kidding me.
but only on the Danish level. So I mean, it's not like anything impressive or whatever. I was in the top 20 in Denmark, I think, something like that. Um,
First off, there's a competitive Tekken scene in Dane
I don't know if there is anymore.
okay, okay.
I haven't been on.
Was it like a circuit of Tekken bars in Copenhagen, or how did that work exactly?
No, no, there was like a Danish forum. I think we met originally. I met the other Danish sort of high-level players on a board called Tekken.cc, which was like the place for Tekken back in the early
Oh my
2000s.
gosh.
I even had like a Tekken email address and everything. um, but yeah, I met some of the high-level Danish players on that board, and then one of them made their own Danish board on another website, and that's sort of how we hooked up. And then we would just meet. Like arcades haven't existed in Denmark for 20 years, so we had to meet up at each other's places and play. Um, yeah, and then there was a few tournaments then and now and then.
So do you still watch some of the? Now we're completely off topic, but I'm just curious. Do you still watch any of the fighting tournaments?
No, no, I haven't. I used to watch Evo and things like that, but I haven't been
Yeah.
into fighting games since. yeah, a very long time.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
well, that's
still
really cool.
interested in them, but it's just not the same level that it was.
I think the last fighting game I tried to play was Blaze Blue, and I was very, very bad at it.
Right. It's
Um,
also very, very difficult and very advanced. And I would say when that came out, I was on my way sort of out of the hardcore fighting game genre, so I was really fascinated by the visuals. Like that hand drawn 2D animated style is quite impressive. But like playing it is like full chaos on the screen, and you have no idea what's
yeah,
going
yeah,
on.
yeah.
Really, really advanced. It's yeah, fascinating though.
That's really cool. That's really cool. I didn't. I don't think I knew that about. So that background from like all those console games really kind of translated as you started getting into the other side of things and back into the PC games. That's really cool.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth. I've sort of have had periods of time where I was really hardcore into like a specific genre, but I've more or less touched all genres at one time or another. But I would say
Yeah.
RPGs are definitely near and dear to my heart.
This
But
may be a
another,
random question. I think like someone in the Twitch chat kind of alluded to this in a way, but I don't think I've asked this. This is not on the scripts. This is going to be a YOLO one. But
sure.
did you find that like that fighting background had influence into like the visceral level of animation and combat that we have in Rome? Because I mean, some of the animations and the way that like they fight and even how we've gone about the development is very cool. So, did you draw from some of that inspiration when you were when we were working on some of that?
I'm sure it had some influence. I mean, I love well choreographed fighting scenes in movies and games. So yeah, I'm sure it had some influence.
Did
Um,
you when you were planning the mocap sessions and kind of figuring out how that frames up, maybe pulling from some of your favorite moves or whatever?
yeah, I mean, I had some input and I had some ideas. Yeah, I mean, of course, fighting games, it's usually all about making it really exaggerated and elaborate and unrealistic. Whereas we had to try to keep it grounded in Rome. Um, so there's obviously limits to what we can do, but we tried to push it anyway.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think today, so if you haven't read, the Dev Diary is live on our community site, community.expedition. Whoa, I can't talk today. Community.expeditionseries.com. And I encourage you to check it out. It's the first diary where we really talk about the visuals. I think the game looks gorgeous, and I think it's a fun conversation to go through. But in the Dev Diary, when we originally talked about this topic, it was about kind of looking at the broader scope of like how we develop the visual style for Expeditions Rome, but it really very quickly kind of narrowed down into a talk about kind of that North Africa location and that style. So that may sound strange, but that's really kind of where the project started, and I think it's a for us and having gone through that journey, it was a natural place for us to start, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Maybe I should mention that way back in the beginning, like 4 years ago, when Rome was just a concept or proof of concept, the original concept was that it was supposed to take place only in Africa. And that is the basis for why we delved so extra deeply into Africa specifically, because I basically had to try and prove to my bosses that we could actually set a game only in Africa and still have enough uh, visual variety in terms of landscape and cultures and
Yeah.
flora and fauna and everything, that we could justify that and make it not just all desert or not just all oases or you know um, so yeah, that's actually what kicked it off. And I thought that was interesting to mention in the article, because I think it gives a very. I chose to focus on Africa because I think it was easier for me to try and show the progression of the development, like how we started and how we moved on from the starting steps and how it sort of developed over time. Yeah,
It's a really interesting conversation topic because when you think about especially northern Africa, you get those ideas of deserts and oasis and kind of those very I don't want to say simple, but they're very samey kind of looks, and it's almost a different version of that. They used to call it the gray problem in the PS3, Xbox 360 era, where everything started having this gray kind of feel to it. And I know in the very beginning we had the brown problem where everything had this like dirt brown look to everything. That was I guess in a way, one of our big goals in tackling this was how do we diversify or add variety into what is preconceived even for us as a very same kind of environment set.
But I think when most people, like people who don't live in Africa or haven't actually gone there, like myself, well, no, I have actually been to Africa, but I was like 4. When we think of Africa and desert, like we immediately just think sand dunes, palm trees, camels, and that's about it, right? Maybe some mountains in the distance. And I would say during spending some time researching the different areas of Northern Africa showed to me like it's a hugely diverse landscape. It's obviously very arid, but still like just the colors and the shapes and the flora and everything. It's really hugely diverse and very, very interesting. And some of the places are almost, some of the places we have actually on purpose not included because people would think they were fantasy.
Really? Wow.
Because they look so exotic, yeah. Or at least that was our concern. So there were some of the more like extreme. For example, they have these really crazy sandstone formations in some places that have these layers of color that look completely crazy. And we were not confident we could actually pull that off in the game without it looking fake. So that was one thing, for example.
It kind of leads into another comment because it was really important to us, I guess, to ground, and this is true for the Expedition franchise in general, but it's like the game's visuals are grounded in reality. There's a very strong desire to keep the plausibility of the world, the environments, the characters very believable. It's a reflection of even the story stuff that we talked about last week with Jonas and Fosse to make the characters feel grounded. That happens in the game's environments and art as well.
Yeah, and it's kind of I've often used this term magical reality, but obviously completely wrongly because it's a school of painting and things, but I use the term for what we're trying to do. So we are trying to make an environment that seems believably realistic or authentic, but still it's like the greatest of that, if you understand what I mean. So a realistic environment can be anywhere from 1 to 10 in how impressive it is, and we always try to make it 10. So we want to reality can be very drab and very boring and very mundane, so we always try to create like the postcard version of reality, if you will. So
yeah,
it's
definitely
still real, but it's like Hollywood reality, if you will, almost.
No, it's I remember there was I want to say it was a call, but it could have been an email thread. It's a little bit blurry sometimes, all the conversations and how they layered together. But I think we were talking to the team or the artist that was working on the portraits, which the portraits are little portraits of characters that show up in the dialogue system and inventory systems and whatnot. And I remember you calling out all these low-level details about, okay, well, this is the way the leather would be made, or this is how they would be gilded a certain way, or the weapon would be this type of weapon with this material. Because it almost feels like at this point you're an expert on even the way this stuff has been made and built in this era in order to bring that reality forward.
Right. I'm very far from an expert, should be said. The interesting thing is, when we started this project, it wasn't my first choice. I've never been particularly interested in Rome, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
But I thought it was interesting enough, and I thought the time period was interesting, and the story pitch and everything, and it was vastly different from Viking, and that alone was very attractive because it was so different. And getting the opportunity to explore Northern Africa, which is an exotic, unknown location for me, was wonderful. So I would say my interest in Rome grew as I worked on the project more and more, and the more research I did as well. So we didn't really work with any external historical consultants or anything, so we had to do all of our research ourselves. So I did mostly the visual research, whereas the writers did more of the textbook, of the heavy reading. And so the whole sort of armors and weapons and the nature of them and their attributes at the time period actually started again in the earliest form of the game, which was supposed to take place 100 years earlier than the game does now. And the Roman army looked very, very different at the time. It was before, like they had a military reform basically at some point. I can't remember exactly when it was. It was somewhere between like 50 BC and 80 BC, something like that, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong. Where they had an actual reform that turned it into more like the military that everyone thinks of when they think of the Roman military, which is like this basically state military where they issue uniforms, and it's much more like a modern army. So prior to that, in the Renaissance, basically they had the same system as they had in ancient Greece and in other places, where it was like more like a citizen militia, and everyone had to provide their own armor and equipment.
Oh, right. They had to bring them home.
Yeah, and I actually knew from Viking that, for example, steel was an extremely valuable commodity, which is, for example, in the Viking Age, only the richest people really could afford swords, because they would, like, it was steel and they were really, really expensive and time consuming to make. So that was a sign of high status to own a sword. And there was kind of similar actually in the ancient times, where bronze, at least initially, was or for a long time, was the metal that they used to make both armor and weapons out of. And then later on came iron and steel, and that made me very interested in the different types of materials and manufacturing and so on that they used at the time. So yeah.
It's so crazy to think about that, because like to us, we can go to like a Renaissance festival and buy cheap steel mockery swords for like next to nothing. But when you think about like this era and even like our perceptions of it, you think about these weapons being plentiful. But you're right, I guess, like for they were probably very rare, and so there was a certain level of care and character that each of them had.
Yeah.
I think we get some of that even in the visuals and how they like try to keep them tied to that.
It's a little bit of a funny example maybe is that so all of the items in the game, or at least weapons, have a tier. And so in our game, the lowest tier is bronze, which kind of has a goldenish color. And the highest tier, the highest quality, is steel, which is visually the opposite of what you normally see in like a fantasy game, for example. Because steel looks more mundane, and people always tend to gravitate towards the golden color as being the premium. So that's a very interesting challenge as well.
Yeah. There's Sakis asked a question about kind of the fantasy elements in Rome, and this is actually we'll talk about that specifically a little bit later, but I think there's a good connection to like even how we're evolving the art style. Like in Vikings and Conquistadors, I think it was extremely grounded. Like everything was attempted to be grounded in that setting, and we were from my understanding, I wasn't on those projects, but from my understanding, the team was very disciplined about making sure that the armor, the visual elements, the environments, everything was as true to reality as it could be. In Rome, it's still very grounded, but I think, and I remember from our early conversations a number of years ago, there was this desire to, I guess, explore, can we do reality plus without losing that perspective, which is a challenge, I guess, right? I mean, I know there's been a lot of that kind of, it's a game, we got to make the armors look cool, we got to add a little bit of flair, but at the same time, we have to make them still feel authentic to a certain degree. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, that had to have been really tricky, I imagine.
I mean, we've certainly gone further in Rome than we did in Viking. I would say a big part of well, basically how anal we were about the historical details in Viking is that the vast majority of the team are Danish, so it's our own cultural heritage that we grew up with.
Oh, right.
We've all grown up with the mythology and the sagas and everything. And we have access to, archaeological finds of Viking ships, and we have a sort of very strong history, and we really wanted to do it right. And
yeah, we were talking, by the way, Jonas and I were talking about the cursing stones last week.
Yeah.
You may be in your heritage cursed by someone on a cursing stone. You never even know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we still have these leftovers from the Viking Age, around the country, and also in all of Scandinavia, of course.
Sure.
And we had we looked at other attempts at making Viking games, and we just found that even if the games were good, they always either didn't get the historical stuff accurate enough, or they just made them straight up fantasy.
Right.
So we wanted to try and make something that was just a bit different. And since we already had, the strengths of many of us already being familiar with the source material, it was much easier for us to keep it much more focused in that game. Yeah.
I feel like one of the areas that really comes out to is the equipment of the player, like the armors, the weapons, et cetera, because they are certainly grounded, and they're not going to look like, you're not going to have like a staff with a glowing orb on it, or a weapon that just defies all laws of physics for why you'd ever use that weapon. But at the same time, we did embellish here and there to make like unique items, unique weapons feel more exciting to a player than maybe you would have seen for a warrior of that stature in the time. And I think, in my personal opinion is I don't think it really robs from the authenticity, but I do think it adds that extra flair of like, at the end of the day, it's a game and you have to feel excited about the things that you get access to. And so it adds that little bit of flavor into it, a little bit of salt and pepper.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason we wanted to do it, just because, that in the more loyal you are to historical accuracy, the less creative freedom you have, and the more drab the visuals will tend to get, in my opinion. So we wanted to input a bit more room for creative freedom in this game, and we also looked at other historical games, both in the much more fantasy sort of end of the spectrum, but also in more the respected large tactical historical games and so on, to see what they were doing. Yeah, we thought it was we definitely wanted to have more, how can I say, just a level more of sort of creative visual creation or visual pizzazz. I'm not sure exactly what the term is, but yes, we want to add some more flair.
A little bit. Yeah. It's like the emerald, the cook. You have to spice it up a little bit. Bam, right? Like the whole emerald thing for anyone that ever watched any of those old cooking shows. Yeah, I think it comes across. One cool treat for this stream later on, we actually have a time lapse of a sword being made or a dagger being made. We'll be able to show you kind of in a time lapse fashion how some of the 3D team went about making that asset. So it'll be a really cool treat for those who stick around for the last 15 or 20 minutes or so. So let's go into
just mention one more thing about the outfits specifically is there's also levels to it. So for example, with the Romans, we've made those quite historically accurate, whereas the Nasamones are, you could argue that they're entirely fantasy because there was next to no actual documentation available about them. There was Roman text.
Not a lot of records and stuff. There are tribal people though, probably with not a lot of records that persisted for so long.
Yeah, there's a couple of descriptions from the Romans, a couple of illustrations which might be frescoes or sort of cave paintings, but not very little, and very, very little was known about them, and basically nothing about their culture, at least nothing we could find. So we decided to take full advantage and just say, okay, this gives us leeway to make something that can be really, creative and visually interesting, and probably, less realistic, but, still reasonable, I think.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's a good lead into, I think, we talked in the diary about developing the environment art quite a bit, and I think the focus on the African setup really, or the North African setup, I should say, is a big part of that vision. So, you talked a little bit about, and I think we've shown a little bit of these earlier. We probably have some more we can put up there. We talked a little bit about the research you guys did, and I remember we had these old conversations about doing all these image research and trying to understand what the visuals could look like. So, what was it just like Google image searching? Was there specific locations you were trying to pull images from? How did you go about tackling grabbing this reference research, even for areas like the Nasamones region? What was the process for that? And hi, Stefan. Stefan1, good to see you. Sorry, just saying hi to chat.
The first go-to is always the internet.
Right, of course.
So, I personally come from, like I mentioned, a background of, spare time modding and things like that. And when you have no budget, Google is your friend. And you can get quite far with Google. or whatever else image search you want to use. But we did also use library books. Like I went to the library and found books on Roman technology, and that was when we needed to get more specific. If there wasn't really anything good that we could find online, then found books on Egyptology, hieroglyphs, Egyptian history, and art, and like I found a whole book of like Egyptian patterns and things like that. So we also did spend some time on more sort of traditional research, which we also incorporated. Yeah, but I would say the internet. Yeah, Google is number one.
We were flashing some of the reference images you put up there for the stream, and I always found it fascinating, like you were talking before, just how diverse some of these landscapes were. And I remember even in some of the early concept art exploration, like we really were like iterating a number of times trying to pull those unique shapes and colors. I remember like the difference between the sandy rocks and the more volcanic dark rocks and the way they were shaped and everything, and trying to bring those into the different scenes. That research was really valuable to just create that diversity of visual language like we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and it was a long process because in the beginning it wasn't quite so interesting, so we've iterated on it quite a bit.
I remember I think one of like the first pre-production milestones, and they came in and we were looking at the concepts, and all of us were like, they all kind of look the same. Like they don't look that unique. And I think we definitely got there as we kind of pushed those angles for sure.
I also think, again, in relation to how, historically accurate and realistic we wanted it to be, that was also part of that process, finding where should the balance be. And I think in the beginning we were more restrained, and later on we loosened up a bit more. And also it depends on, again, what culture are we talking about here. So like, again, the Nasamones, they have, like, there's no infrastructure left, almost no documentation.
Right.
Big freedom. So for example, we decided, it wouldn't be completely unreasonable that they were described as sort of a nomadic people. So it wouldn't be entirely unreasonable to draw inspiration from present day Bedouins and Berber people.
Oh, yeah.
I do believe I read somewhere that the Nasamones were of Berber ethnicity, I think. So we drew definitely inspiration from them quite a bit. And again, it's a wonderful excuse to add a splash of lots of color into this very sort of almost monochrome desert landscape, or at least it can be. There was a wonderful opportunity for creativity. While on the other end of the spectrum, Roman and Greek architecture is extremely well documented, and a ton of it still exists. So there's much narrower opportunities for what you can do there. And I think all of that was constructed with very specific rules and like aesthetic principles and all of that. And there's like there's a ton of it out there, and many people are experts on it. So we had to tread more carefully in that area.
And Sagas asked a really good question. I think I'll be curious how much you learned as we're going through this whole process, but we'll take that question at the end about the challenges of translating those landscapes into a top-down perspective, which is definitely a real thing that we talked about quite a bit, especially when it comes to exaggerating shapes and color and brightness and whatnot. So the next thing we want to go through is talking. We've shown like some of the reference images. Gotta love stream technology. Sometimes it likes to hiccup a little bit, so we should be back. Let me see if people can hear me. Yeah, get the goats off the cables, right? It's more like getting the bugs out of the software and the computers and stuff. All right, hooray, we're back. So we're gonna go right back into it. So yeah, we were just talking about how translating those environment arts to the exploration of the in-game concepts. So I think we have a cool image from the dev diary. We have like these 5 or 6 different concept paintings that we did, and I think it was a fun, like the exploration process I think was really fun because it was a lot of experimentation and trying different things. Again, in pre-production was all those different moments we were floating back and forth. What were some of the, like, how did you communicate with the concept artists to push them in different directions as we were exploring these different landscapes and scenes?
Right, so the very first small thumbnail explorations actually were made all by me before we had any other...
So you had to tell yourself how to push your own stuff.
Yes. before we had any other, like the team was really small and we're still hiring people at the time. So I just worked on it on my own at the very, very early beginnings of the project. And it's very simple. We're simply trying, looking at the different references and then seeing, okay, how, like while still staying loyal to the actual geography, how can I make this look like, how can I heighten this to look fantastic? Like what can I do in terms, can I use light and color to make it look, or almost like fantasy? Like how far can I really push it without changing it into something that doesn't exist or couldn't exist in real life? And I think in some of those images it's definitely cranked up to like an unrealistic level, but that was part of the exploration. We needed to find where's the limit, how far can we go, what are the opportunities here. And I mean, early on, like I mentioned in the article, I knew that lighting would play a huge factor in how we could manipulate and present the game world. So yeah, that was basically it. So later on, when we got the concept artists on, we had refined the vision and the concept a little bit more, and it's definitely dialed back from those first initial explorations. But that's part of the whole point of the first sort of high level process, is to explore boundaries, to find, like, to explore what your options are, and your boundaries, and see how far can we go, when have we gone too far, should we dial it back, and to get a nice overview of what your options are and what your frame is going to be, and then you move on from there, and then you narrow it in and refine it and iterate and so on.
Yeah, of course. Can you put the high concept image back up there when you have a chance? I want to talk about, there's a couple of those shots on that image that I think are really cool. Like one of my favorite ones is the one with the I think it's like second on the high concept image, the one with the it's the one with the light coming through the trees, the one on the top right, where you have these like really swirly trees, and you have this like almost like lens flare light coming in, and the trees are all kind of leaning in the direction. They just look really, it's just a very, you were talking about before, you think about North Africa, your instincts go to deserts and plateaus, but then there's also these kind of unique vegetation and light opportunities. I think, I mean, it looks pretty, it looks gorgeous. I love it.
Thanks. One of the things I noticed quite early on was that North Africa is a lot more fertile than I initially thought. Again, because I thought Africa, desert dunes, palm trees, right? So yeah, and this is this image was actually, it's very simple. It's very specifically, it's an olive grove with ancient olive trees, and an olive plantation is just olive trees in a row, and that's quite visually uninteresting. So I thought, okay, olive groves have existed in North Africa for olive production for thousands of years. So they will definitely be there. How can we make that look interesting? So I added light and atmosphere, and really tried to push it as much as I could.
Yeah, so cool looking. I mean, I you can just leave that image up there for a second. I love it. Hey, Kermit the Frog, by the way. Like, it's, some of these scenes are so cool. I also really like the it's almost, it reminds me of a formation in Arizona called Rainbow, I think it's called Rainbow Bridge, where there's like this rock formation that goes over a water area. But in the image on the bottom left, one up, it has this like very white sand, almost like salty looking sand, and you have these like volcanic rocks that are kind of going in these different like step shapes, and I don't know, it's just super, it's very, very cool, really pretty.
All right, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
really
we did
nice.
actually take a couple of looks at deserts elsewhere in the world, just for
Okay.
and for reference. So we did actually look at some American, like Arizona and Mexico and some other places. It was mostly just for comparison's sake, to see, so more to sort of what's unique about this type of desert as opposed to the one in North Africa. Do they have things in common, so we can actually also use American desert references, maybe get away with that, and so it's just part of the process.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, Kermit the Frog, I always miss you when you're not here, man. You're one of the, you seem to show up on every single stream, so of course we're all excited when you're here, as is everybody. So yeah, it's good to see you, man. So so let's talk about that translation from going to the concept image phase and then kind of those in-game images. And I think we have a really interesting shot that shows, because the game has a day-night cycle, so we actually have like 4 different times of day. I think it's dusk, noon, morning, and or dawn and night, right? The 4 different parts of the cycle. So it's an interesting perspective to see like how those different lighting explorations also change one specific scene, because you can have one scene that has its own almost like color perspective, but that color shifts as the lighting changes.
Yeah. So if you can see those, that example with the 4 different lighting settings or setups in the same scene.
This is an in-game shots. These are all these images are taken from engine. These are actual gameplay shots. Yeah.
So in relation to the previous image, which is really vibrant and colorful, you can see here it's dialed down quite a lot. And that's a development that has happened over, well, a couple of years, basically, because as you ask me, like, how do you translate those basically first-person eye height sort of landscape images into a top-down game? Yeah, that's the whole trick, isn't it? Why game development?
Yeah, I know we were doing like screenshots and gameplay videos, and it's like I kept on wanting to bring the camera down, and you're like, no, the game doesn't quite work at the down camera angle because it's designed with very exaggerated color and lighting and shapes for that top-down camera, which really is a completely different approach.
Yeah. So one thing we wanted to do in this game specifically, different than in Viking, was to get a little bit closer to having that horizon and the sky as an element in the scene by having backdrops, so you could get more of a sense of depth and scale to the environment, and we have that at certain places in the game. So that's one way, or that's one thing that we've tried to do. Another thing, getting back to this lighting setup. So the lighting setup in this image specifically is for Africa, and each region in the game has its own lighting setup. So all 4 times of day look different in Greece. They look different in Gaul, and they also look a bit different in Rome. And this is one of the creative sort of principles that we've worked on from the beginning, because we knew lighting was so crucial as to how to sort of portray each region. So it's part of why we decided early on that we want each region to have its own visual identity as strongly as possible. And that's in terms of everything, like what is the dominating color palette, what vegetation, what does the landscape look like, what do the people look like, what does the architecture look like. It encompasses everything. So for example, night will look vastly different in Gaul, and night in Greece will also look quite different than the African night. Yeah.
I love actually there's obviously, since we're developers, we get all sorts of fun debug commands, and it's actually quite fun sometimes to go to the different maps and just change those lighting settings and see how much the color in the environment changes. And I know one thing, you guys have met Jonas a number of times. Jonas always likes to talk about how maps at night have a whole bunch of different elements that jump in there. Like on some maps, guys will pull out torches, or there's different lighting sources that come into the scene to help make some of that stuff come alive. We're actually experimenting more with different ways we can make the light in the night look more vibrant, more interesting. It's very it's almost like the different environments have their own unique personalities based on those different lighting profiles, which is really fun. Actually, like Nasominus, which is what we were talking about earlier, that kind of unique tribal look. Their main map, Court of Heaven, which I think we're about to talk here in detail, looks completely different from even like just dawn to dusk. Like that really warm kind of a golden hue in dawn to the brightness, like the heat of the sun in like that dusk or sorry, the noon time frame. Like you get a very different color perspective based on what time of day it is.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Definitely, yeah. And again, the lighting is such a critical part of the game that we'll be tweaking it and working on it probably, up until release, or as far as we can anyway, because we can always adjust it and we can always improve it. And a huge challenge, which is really an interesting game development challenge, is that, again, this is one of those realism versus game. The night, if we had to be realistic about it and historical, every
You
night.
wouldn't see anything.
It's black.
Yeah.
And you basically have to not play it during the nighttime, or have your guys carry torches around with like a very, very limited sort of field of light. But that would be too
It's an
annoying.
interesting thing to talk about, actually, because I think one of the the reasons why these dev streams are hopefully interesting to the people who are watching either now or on the VODs later is hearing some of the challenges we face. And what August just talked about is something we're actually dealing with right now as a challenge, because we've tried to add light into the maps and make them feel alive when it's dark. We're also trying to keep some of that sense of nighttime in the maps, and we've been doing focus tests lately, and we're getting feedback that the nights still feel too dark. And it's like, well, shoot, do we just have like the sun glow across the entire map and just make it blue? Like, how do we bring the atmosphere of the nighttime to life in a desert? And there's not really much light in the desert when it's nighttime. Like, how do you? And it's a very interesting, or even like in the forest, right? If you're in the forest and it's night, I don't know how many of you guys are campers and whatnot, but if you're out in the desert, if you're out in the forest at nighttime, you can barely see the hand in front of you, right? Like, it's dark. So it's been a very unique challenge that we are still iterating on right now. I mean, it's something we're currently working on to try to figure out how to bring those to life. It's a tricky balancing act.
Yeah, another part of it is also, again, staying with the Court of Heaven. So this is a settlement where it's easier to get away with, but in the night setting, there's a lot of light sources. So there's firelight,
Torches and like, braziers and whatnot,
everything.
yeah.
But we've also had to add light sources in natural environments for nighttime settings, because otherwise it's simply just it's too dark and it's impossible to navigate. So that's also it's also very interesting, creative challenge or balance. Like, how many lights can we get away with before this looks ridiculous or too much, or like how does it affect the overall impression of the scene? So that's also very interesting. Balancing act.
Games like all the modern games, like whether it's like a Grand Theft Auto or a Cyberpunk or whatever, they get a free pass. They can just add like street lights everywhere, and it's like, oh look, it's lit, it's fine, you can see everything. Or add like neon strobing lights, and it's part of the sci-fi look. When you're in a Greek farm, and it's midnight, you can't put a street light there to add color. It doesn't work.
If any of my bosses sees the stream, please, can we make a fantasy or sci-fi game next time?
You don't have to try to figure out how to light the nighttime. It's actually, I know it sounds funny, but it's the full moon conversation. Like, most games that deal with this in this genre or in these eras have to just imagine that the moon's always at full in the largest moon you can imagine, and then you just exaggerate that light where you need to. It's tricky though, it's hard.
Yeah.
So another thing that we have to show, and I think this would be really fun, so we have a number of videos and images that you guys rendered out of, like, Stefan, ancient times but with electricity. Oh, there you go. We can just do like a blended timeline where it's like ancient Rome but everyone has power, I guess. It's not even cyberpunk, it's like electrified Rome. I'm sorry, what?
The new steampunk subgenre, maybe.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be steampunk. It'd be like concrete punk, or I don't know. It's right. Like you take like the modern trappings of New York when it comes to like lighting and whatnot, but you throw it into like the city of like a city in Greece or Athens or something like that, and just blend the two. But be careful. We're game designing right now in live. We're gonna give away some great ideas.
Feature creep.
Yeah. So let's talk about we have a number of things that you provided that I think would be really cool to show. And one of them we'll start off with is this it's this video of a dagger being rendered, like this time lapse. Maybe you can, as we're getting that pulled up here on talk to us a little bit about what everyone's watching here and what the process is. When, I mean, some people are probably artists, they understand this process quite well, but for all those who don't understand it, maybe you can walk through kind of how this works, like how someone makes an asset like this.
So this one is it obviously starts with a kind of artistic brief. So I either have one of our concept artists make a sketch. So I brief the concept artist, and then they make the design, and then the 3D artist uses that to create the asset. I believe that was the case for this one. So this is a dagger that one of the Greek troop types is carrying. I cannot remember which one exactly. It might be the assassin, or it might be the heavy infantry guy. I can't remember exactly, but it's from the Greek faction. So it's modeled after a historical Greek dagger. the name escapes me right now, actually. But it's a historical Greek type of bronze dagger that it's modeled after. So it was very easy. Like the basic shape was already determined. Our concept artist just added some extra flair to it, some extra detail. So this was a very sort of straightforward kind of deal, I would say. And also our artist who made it is really good and experienced, and this is like a small task for him. Yeah, and again, as you can see, we tried it. It's sort of it's textured in the colors of the faction as well, to make sure we have that cohesive, again, design direction for each faction in the game, both in terms of their color palettes, but also the aesthetic language that they have. So what is the style of their outfits? What sort of ornamentation do they have? What shapes are they using? What pattern styles? What colors? What materials? And all of those things are all considered for each and every faction. Again, and put next to each other. We've always tried to distinguish them as much from each other as we can, while still trying to make them look as much as the historical counterparts as we could. Yeah, so that's basically it.
It's always an extraordinary process, I think, whenever I see some of these time-lapse footages where you just watch something come from nothing. Like that kind of that vision of here is just a giant block. It's almost like a digital block of clay, so to speak, and you're seeing like big chunks being pulled off and then molded and all these decorations added. I mean, it really is. I mean, they call them sculptors for a reason. It is kind of the modern version of a sculptor, just doing it with digital clay instead of actual physical clay. It's a really interesting process.
Yeah, I think our guy, he started with a very low poly base mesh and then sculpted based on that, and then went back and made the real low poly afterwards.
Yeah, so cool. I know we have a number of other assets we can show too. I think there's like I know that you personally really were into the Greek statues, both in making them and wanting to add more over time. Sorry, what?
I said we never have too many statues.
Never have too many statues. So I think we're going to pull a couple images up here of some of the different other objects you have, and a few of them are these statues. So what is with you in the statues? Like, why do you like the statues so much? Maybe tell a little about the ones you provided.
It's a very good question. I think it's more specifically this era of time where naturalistic statues really came to the fore, and where first the Greeks and then later on Romans as well took this art form to like an extremely high level. It's just, I don't know, it's hard to say. It's very aesthetically pleasing, and it's very sort of, it's naturalistic and it's very aesthetically pleasing, and they make some interesting decisions on where they exaggerate and how they do it.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you compare them to sort of, I mean, it's kind of a character design in a way, especially when they depict gods. And if you compare that to like a modern day game character, you can see there's a vast difference in how you portray anatomy, and posing, and what they wear and so on. And I like these. The statues are a way of injecting. So they're a way of injecting human sort of physical aesthetic and beauty into a architectural context. So they provide that extra level of artistic flair, if you will, and also human beauty, because they're usually quite beautiful as well. Like they're kind of perfect in a way, and I think that just adds an extra element, not only of how can I say, aesthetics, but in a way it also gives us a human connection, because even though it is a statue, we do draw, we do feel like it resonates with us, because we can clearly recognize it as human, and it gives us a connection to this fictional environment, or historical environment. Like when you walk, if you walk into like one of the ancient temples or areas in Europe and from ancient times, and you see these statues, for example, or see them in a museum, you can see that, you know, this was made like thousands of years ago, but people were still people. And even
Right,
though
right.
we don't know them and we can never experience what they experienced, and our culture is completely different today, we still have a connection in a way, and we're all still human, right?
Yeah, it's in a way it kind of transcends the time because you look at something that is still you,
Yeah.
and it brings back. I actually felt like when I first saw the statues, I think it was in the Gladiator School map. When I think that was like the first map that we had some of those final statues added to that I remember seeing,
Yeah.
and they were very striking. And it's just a very strong asset piece, and there was a lot of detail and love in it. I actually really August provided one. Maybe we'll show him in a future stream. He provided a time lapse of making one of the statues, and I really wanted to add it to the stream. However, I was worried it'd be a little bit not safe for work.
Right.
There's a lot of marble ass shots in those stream in that video, and I'm like, maybe we can't put that on the stream.
Right.
But it's a very interesting process, even like watching the digital sculpting of that asset go. And they're just like the in game, they're very compelling, and they are a little bit exaggerated, and I think in their scale, because you do see it from that top down camera, so you get this like they feel much like if you were to actually look at it from the ground up, they're like 5 times the size of your character almost. But when you see it from the normal camera, it looks just fine. But they feel really, I mean, that marble strength and that kind of that sense of epicness really comes out. They're super cool.
Yeah, and I guess I forgot to mention that like these statues was such a huge part of the cultures that we're trying to portray, that we obviously need to have them in order to, you know, create a more convincing portrayal of these cultures as well. So yeah, that's definitely also part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And just a little comment on the oversized nature. That's a general thing. So many things, if you pay attention, are oversized in the game and in down games in general. Actually, in games in general. For example, like sizes of spaces, like rooms. If you make them just 1-to-1 with real life, they will almost always look too cramped. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there's a whole. It's a lot about using like proportions and sizes of things in like completely unrealistically, creating them in an unrealistic size and scale, but using them to try and create a believable representation or illusion on the screen.
Yeah, and this is good. This is good. I think we'll spend some of ours. We'll do a couple questions. We got a couple of questions from Musakis, and this first one was about the challenges of translating landscapes and elements to that top-down perspective. I mean, that's kind of how you solve it, right? A lot of it is exaggeration and kind of looking at the proportions that create fun spaces and interesting spaces, and then putting that into play, knowing that it's not going to be right if you were on the ground as a human looking at it, but it does make sense when you're from the god camera kind of looking down.
Yeah, and also so things like I mentioned previously with, for example, backdrops is one way where we try to expand the view of the player, basically to give more of an illusion of space. But also, for example, when you look like at an eye level image, you can see a lot of things going on, of course, towards the horizon. But once the camera turns down, you'll mostly be looking at the ground and at roofs and at big sort of flat surfaces. So the focus goes much more to how can we make that interesting, and that's one of the places where you really have to not be a slave to realism, because, for example, usually we have to make areas a lot more dirty and cluttered and full of bric-a-brac and various scatter objects, to avoid having these big open empty spaces that will take up sort of big chunks of the screen and are very boring to look at in the long run. So that's one of the major challenges, I would say.
Okay. So we talked about this other question a little bit, but I think there's a spin on it that Musakis is getting to that I think would be worth maybe elaborating on some. He asked, Or he or she. I'm guessing it's a he. I think he's been on the stream before.
I think it's
So
Jonas
previous,
with a different name.
I'm not sure, but says previous Expeditions games did have some outright fantasy elements, albeit presented in an ambiguous way, like a sort of magical realism, like dreams or etc. Will Rome have anything like that as well?
I'm not. I guess I can say yes.
Okay.
We've continued that. We've continued that way of representing magic, or should I say, belief in the supernatural of the people of the time. So yeah, we've tried to. Again, it's basically a similar principle of not trying to make it overt, but making it possible to interpret or chalk up to people's beliefs, or and make it ambiguous instead of vulgar. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
it
think
also
that,
comes out, I think, in even like how we do like certain skill options or abilities, or how we do like healing or whatnot, or bandaging. And there's a little bit of like a blend there, but it's like, yeah, I mean, if someone gets shot with an arrow, you can't really bandage it up, but I mean, we kind of allow some of that to come in because it just kind of makes sense, and you have some visual representations of that to help kind of sell it.
right. So obviously, a huge amount of compromise has to be made in order to make it a fun game. So things like just healing someone in the heat of a fight, that would never happen in real life. But we need to have that function in a game like this. So, so what we can try and do, for example, is
I'm pretty sure if someone gets shot, all you need to do is have those shock paddles, right? And just go like that, and then they come
Right.
back up.
Exactly.
Isn't that how it works in Battlefield or something, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean,
and that's
bandaging a knife wound that cuts your arm off makes complete sense, right? Or,
right. So in this setting, instead of just making it happen by magic, it's like a band-aid. So it's a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah, I think those are always. It's always a little bit tricky when you're making a more realistic game, because you don't want to like completely suspend disbelief, but you do have to do it a little bit, or mechanics don't work, and it just becomes okay. Well, now you know that character is dead, and you can't do anything about it, and that's kind of sad.
It's very important that the game is fun. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an entertainment product, so people shouldn't be frustrated and bored.
Yeah. What's your I'll ask you one last question. What is your favorite environment in the game so far? Like, what's your favorite scene?
That's a very tough question. I like different ones for different reasons. I like some of the more unique ones a lot. I think I'll pick two that are vastly different.
Okay.
One that's really interesting is the sacrificial site that we have in Gaul, where you have a very.
Oh yeah.
It's interesting because it's one of the places where we've had an opportunity to push things quite far, almost in a horror direction, which is very unique in the game, and I think very interesting. And the second one is the city of Memphis in Egypt, which is just a unique African city with a very unique ambiance and a very unique sort of look to the whole layout. And we've tried to create it like a sort of old kingdom style Egyptian city. Yeah, it's quite unique and it really stands out. And I think it turned out quite well.
So I think what we'll do, and this is by the way completely off the cuff. I haven't told anyone that we were going to do this, but August's responses gave me an interesting idea. So we have two different scenes. We have the sacrificial site, which is in Gaul, and we have the Memphis city, which is in the North African campaign. And we have not shown any images of either of those in game yet. Those are completely new. So they're not in any of our trailers that we released. We haven't shown them on stream. So what we'll do is we have another stream coming up in about 2 to 3 weeks. We will get a Twitter poll and a couple other polls going here in the next week or so, and we will let all of our fans. We'll clip this section of the stream, and we'll let our fans vote which of the two we're going to show. And we'll have. I think Jonas is going to join us for our next stream. I think tentatively scheduled on July 28th. So we'll let everyone vote on which one of the two that we're gonna expose for our next stream, and we'll lead that stream off with showing off a couple images and maybe a video of one of these two locations. So you just
the Memphis scene in the background of your video feed right now.
Yeah, but that's the concept art. We don't have the. We're gonna show the. Yeah, Both are really cool though. So you want something a little more either like horror-y, creepy looking, really unique coloring and whatnot. There's the sacrificial thing. If you want something a little more epic in scale and you have that quintessential Egyptian look, we have the Memphis scene. So look for that poll to come up here in the next couple days, maybe later this week or early next week, and we'll do some voting. And based on which one wins, we'll tease a brand new, never before seen scene on the next stream. So. August, thanks for setting me up for that. I didn't even intend that, but that worked out great. Now we have a new teaser content coming up in the next.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, everyone, that's our stream today. August, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you had fun.
Yeah, it was fun.
I can tell from your answers, this is you love to talk about this stuff. Like you have so many details and emotion on how you describe your connection with the art and the environment and everything. It's I don't know, it's really compelling to see. So appreciate you exposing some of that to everybody.
Yeah, give me a few drinks and I can talk all night.
I think we've been there before.
We might have.
Yes. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining. Again, if you haven't read the Dev Diary, it's up on community.expeditionseries.com. We'll also have this video up on our YouTube page here in a couple days, so you can watch the VOD and rewind and see some of the different awesome visuals. And we will see you guys in a couple weeks. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your week. Cheers, everybody.